Good morning. Welcome back to the ALG show. It's very awkward without the applause. I think we just need this. Oh yes. This is great. I love the applause button. I will never do without. Today we're going to be talking with Parker Nyquist, director, cinematographer, and editor. He's worked extensively with brands like Raisin Bran and Slim Jim, as well as people like Rachel Ray and Jennifer Gardner. Today, we're going to be talking about his thoughts on gear ownership, as well as how advertising has shifted over the course of his career, among a range of things we get into. We get into kind of a variety of topics today, and it's a really interesting conversation. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Work's good, man. A lot of shooting this summer, a lot of prep for the fall, and yeah, super grateful to have jobs coming through.
What kind of work do you normally do?
Primarily commercial branded content, advertising. Outside of that, some music videos, some documentary. The Chicago market has a little bit of everything, so try and dive into wherever the opportunities present themselves.
Yeah, and just sort of me lurking on your website. From my understanding, you kind of do a range of things. So you work between director, DP, and like an editorial role. What do you say is like the most prominent type of work that you end up doing, or what's like the most uh, creatively fulfilling work that you like to do?
I would say those are two different questions. The most creatively fulfilling work I would say is the documentary and music video space.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're telling people stories, you're working with small businesses, you're working with um, individuals who have some sort of compelling story that garnishes a documentary, or you're working with artists that are obviously trying to make it for themselves in a creative field. So that sort of collaboration and that sort of storytelling, I think, is super fulfilling. I would say primarily the work that I do, or the over 50% of the work I do, is more advertising. Some of that is
Mm-hmm.
is also rooted in a lot of storytelling, and I would say the Chicago market works with a lot of ad agencies, so a lot of branded content, a lot of commercial work. I think that's where people here find their bread and butter.
Yeah, it's sort of again, I don't understand the Chicago market as much, but like what we were talking earlier before the show started, and there's obviously a big disparity between like gear accessibility, like we were just talking about earlier, like just to rent a mini, like the price gap is significant. But I agree with you. Like I think music videos for me are also pretty creatively fulfilling. I think the ability just to be able to kind of experiment and give this sort of artist a world to live in, I think is incredible. And I think, especially now, it feels like there's a lot of different creative tools that you can use to sort of experiment and sort of showcase like what it is that the artist wants to present. So in advertising, I'm just sort of asking for myself because in terms of I'm getting into commercials more so in the last year or so. What's been sort of something that has surprised you about like advertising that you didn't expect to sort of be dealing with, whether it's like the agency side of things, whether it's working directly with like a DP as a director, or what's been sort of an unexpected challenge that you've sort of experienced?
I guess what's been really interesting the last few years, as advertising has kind of evolved, traditional days, companies work with, $1 million commercial budgets. Every year they put out, five flagship spots that are supposed to present their entire brand and spread the word across the world. Now, since social media, everything is kind of fragmented, and there's so many different levels of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was freelancing in house at a traditionally PR company that was merging into more advertising, as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter were starting to become these advertising behemoths, where commercials were aired. So it was kind of like the testing ground days of like, here, we'll throw some money at this spot and make something fun for our brand, and we'll put it up on Instagram, and a couple thousand people will see it.
Hmm.
And like there wasn't as much thought put into it. So that was kind of like the wild wild west, and we got to really experiment, really get kind of weird with it. One of the accounts at this agency was Slim Jim, so we got to do some like really weird stuff. One of them being like we built this like balloon rocket and sent it into space that had Slim Jims on it,
Yeah.
and then it had like we like cut out little figurines with fans' faces on them, and then like put a GoPro and launched it into space. And so there's this like whole video of this balloon launching up, and you start to see like the curvature of the Earth,
Oh my god.
and like the camera's pointed at this Slim Jim with these like cut out characters of these people who submitted like comments or their names or something.
Yeah.
And then the balloon popped and it fell down to earth, and there was a whole like recovery mission. So they made this whole like kind of documentary, sort of like hype video behind it. That it was my first job at this agency. I was set to edit the whole thing,
Yeah.
and I thought it was hilarious. This is a huge brand, and they're just kind of like messing around and
Yeah.
launching these things into space, not really caring how it does on the internet. It's just like any exposure is good exposure, but it actually crushed it and got them like a bunch of attention. And so I think like the client and the agency and me all started to see at the same time, like, oh, there's some legs to this, and maybe we should like focus some more energy. And like the tides slowly started to shift, where it was like more of the budget and the time and like the personnel, like the employees, were dedicated towards Instagram, Facebook, uh, what is it, Twitter,
Yeah.
and so I think that that's been cool to just see like everything sort of change and become a little bit more accessible too for these brands,
Yeah.
where like everybody can have a voice. You don't have to spend $1 million to get your commercial on TV. You can just upload it for free on Instagram.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's when one of like the more interesting things is just like the mediums that our content is aired on. And obviously, it's annoying. You as a filmmaker as well probably get frustrated with the 16:9, 1:1, 4:5,
Yeah.
and 9:16 deliverables
Yeah.
for everything.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it's kind of the world we're living in now. So I think you just have to embrace it and kind of utilize the different platforms for the specific content you're trying to put out.
Yeah. And I think, yes, obviously, those, I hate having to. I'm not someone who's going to rotate the camera vertically. I'm just going to shoot it natively if in case the deliverable ends up needing to be like a full 16:9. And also just ergonomically, I prefer to use a camera horizontally. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's cool that maybe this is something that I've seen more recently, that brands aren't so rigid in the way that they're wanting to be perceived. Like I just saw, I was looking around your portfolio, and I saw this beer ad that you did for this. What's it called? The ID Beer Club. That looked
Lazy
like a
Dog Beer Club.
Yeah, Lacy Dog Beer Club. That looked really fun, and I think the fact that brands are willing to take a risk on an idea and not be so like hard headed about like their product being super polished and super, you know what I mean? Like it's um, more fun, and it brings more excitement to the brand. And I've seen that more recently, like I think in the last like 5 years, just sort of commercials that I've seen treatments for. Like it's definitely pushing more for a creative rather than something that's just like, all right, let's showcase the product, let's say what the price is. Like it feels more thought out, and it feels like the brands are excited about what you're doing as a creative, because it feels like the input from the creative person is much more considered. Obviously, I could be wrong about this. My experience in the commercial space is fairly limited, but at least that's from what it sounds like, and it sounds like from your experience at Slim Jim, it sounds like it was a pretty fun time.
Yeah, and the Lazy Dog videos, I think, are a great example of how advertising has shifted as well. So that was, did you see which one of those did you watch?
So it was the one. It was the one particular. It's pinned on your Instagram. It's the two sort of superheroes that I guess they can't get it
Yeah.
up or something, and then they drink some beer and they they chill like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, that's a funny way to put it. They can't get it up. Um, yeah, they're failed superheroes.
Yeah,
Their powers are lacking.
yeah,
But yeah, that's a really good example of advertising kind of shifting, because that is a beer club. It's like run by a restaurant group, and every quarter they do a beer club where they like partner with microbreweries and brew beers, like a 6 pack specifically for their release.
yeah.
And so they'll get like 6 different beers from multiple different breweries, and then they'll brand it all themselves. And they have a club of people who subscribe to them, and they send it out to that club. So every quarter we do, it's like 4 a year. We don't make a video for all of them,
Uh
but
huh.
it's branded completely differently. And that whole like kind of model is flipped, where it's they already know they have their fans.
Yeah,
So they have people who are already dedicated to them, which allows them to take a little bit of a risk on the advertising
yeah.
and make these funny videos. We've done a bunch, like we did the superhero one, we did one that was like a spy noir. We did one that was my friend Steve Delahoyd is the one who directs and produces all of those. I DP them,
Hmm.
and shout out him. He's an amazing person who I've collaborated with for years.
Yeah,
Um, but it kind of allows us to be a little bit more creative with it, as opposed to traditional advertising where you have to have such a wide reach, such a broad reach, and it has to be something that is inclusive to everybody, that can't be really risky, can't be cutting edge, has to fit within certain like time parameters because it's for a massive audience.
hmm,
Whereas this is like they already have their fans,
yeah.
so they know people are gonna subscribe already. So like let's throw them something that we think is kind of cool, and hopefully they like it too.
Yeah, and you can tell just immediately, like now that you mentioned the submarine campaign you did for Lazy Dog, I'm just looking through it right now. You could tell there's like a lot of passion for it, and that the brand wants to be really fun. It kind of reminds me of like kind of the fun that maybe Old Spice used to have. I don't know if they do that sort of
Mm-hmm.
advertising
With
now,
Terry
but
Crews.
yeah, with Terry Crews exactly, and I feel like it's cool to see that that even a brand like Lazy Dog is willing to sort of take a risk on some weird fun advertising, and even from like other stuff that you've done, it seems like there's only a few brands that sort of do that. I was looking at a thing you at a project you did with Rachel Ray for Real Home Chef. That's definitely more in line with sort of traditional advertising and traditional sort of multicam production. What
Mm-hmm.
what was like the main difference between that workflow versus like the Lazy Dog campaign?
So the Rachel Ray campaign, I was brought on to edit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was already shot in New York, and it was with her team that she shot with before. She has a TV show. She's obviously, a marketing wizard and has been around the block for a long time.
Yeah,
So she shot it at a studio in New York, um, and I was brought on after the fact to edit everything.
yeah,
So I mean, completely different workflow because I wasn't involved in production, but obviously dealing with a star of that caliber too, there was a lot of rounds of revisions, there was a lot of editing, um, and at the end of the day, this was going to be a national campaign, so she wanted to make sure she was happy with how she was being perceived, and obviously the brand Home Chef wanted to make sure they were happy with the messaging that was being put across, and me as the editor wanted to make sure I was happy with the content I was making, make sure it looks good, make sure it looks clean, make sure it has some sort of creative aspect to it. Unfortunately, is low on the list of priority.
yeah,
Like I have many bosses above me that I have to abide to,
yeah, yeah,
or that I have to answer to. So it's just depending on the brand, you have more or less say in every project. And thankfully, a lot of the jobs that I produce or direct myself, I am in direct communication with either the ad agency or the client, or the client. And so I can kind of push my creativity to them, push my ideas to them. When I'm a hired gun or just like a freelancer, I have a lot more people that I have to answer to, and my thoughts don't always win. And I think you have to accept that, especially in advertising. It is not as much of a dictatorship as it might be in like filmmaking,
Yeah.
where the director is top dog and he or she makes all decisions for the whole set. And even in that situation, on a movie set, the director isn't always even the top dog. Like there's producers they have to answer to as well, or sometimes even actors they have to answer to. So I think it's just recognizing based on the client and based on the project where your input is most valuable,
Hmm.
and accepting that you might not have final cut approval on everything.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. If it's a product of either I get hired for something and I have to answer to somebody, or I don't get any work but I get to put out exactly what I want, I think the obvious answer is number one for those types of jobs.
Yeah.
The documentaries, the passion projects, that you are top dog, and
Yeah.
you can create stuff that really is organic and really is authentic to your own vision, and you can say something that you want to say without having to answer to all the people controlling the pocketbooks above you.
Yeah, and I think at least this is purely obviously I'm speaking from a almost exclusively a DP perspective, but there's definitely certain ideas that I try to push, and if I really feel like this is the best way that we can either do something or that we can present this part of the story, depending on the obviously given the context of whatever the project is, but there's I usually sort of tend to not be so attached to my ideas simply because like obviously I want to consider what the director's saying and what anyone above me is saying, like it's just as much their work as it is mine, and it isn't worth it for me to just push an idea just to push an idea. Like the only time I've really ever emphasized a creative decision pushing for a specific piece of kit just because it was sort of something that allowed us to translate ideas better, and in terms of like a workflow I was able to justify it that way, and obviously just given the budget restrictions, like it wasn't really something they could consider, and like I was really upset by that, but you know what, like it's okay, like I understand that like budget's a thing, and I was still very happy with the film and how it came out. It's in post production right now. But like I try not to be so hard headed, like for that reason, because like especially like with you editing this Rachel Ray campaign for Home Chef, like I think it isn't worth being as rigid just to have your um maybe this certain idea that you were thinking. Sometimes it's just you're there on assignment,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you can pick and choose the times that you do fight for your ideas,
Yeah.
that makes those times so much more valuable.
Yeah.
Like it's the really quiet kid who's always getting picked on in school and never really speaks up. It's him finally standing up and pushing the bully and cursing him out.
Yeah.
Then it's like, oh shoot, like now we got to take him seriously,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if you're always hard headed and just want to say no to people because it's not your idea, and you always have to be right, sort of thing, then at the end of the day people aren't going to want to work with you that much, and people
Yeah.
aren't going to feel like it's a collaboration. And I think in the filmmaking world, and I would say Chicago especially, because it's a bit tighter knit market than maybe some of the bigger markets like Los Angeles or New York,
Hmm.
like we know a lot of the same people, and relationships are so key to keeping the industry alive and to continuing to get work.
Yeah.
So once you get a reputation of being the guy who's so hard headed, always has to be right, then people don't necessarily want to work with you. Versus if you have great relationships with people, then everybody's voice is kind of heard. And
Yeah.
you obviously are all on your different roles on set, so there is still a bit of a hierarchy. But if a gaffer comes up to me and has a great idea for a shot, I'm not going to scoff that down.
Yeah.
Or if a makeup artist is like, oh, maybe she should turn this way, maybe the blocking should be like this, because then her face will shine a little bit more. That's totally fine with me.
Yeah.
I'm always open for collaboration. And I accept that. Like I value that so much, just because running a set, being a director on a set, or a producer on a set, or even a DP, some of the higher up roles, you have a million things you got to think through the whole day, and maybe some things slip through the cracks at times. So it's great to have other people who are willing to hold you accountable and willing to pitch in if they see something or have an idea, and that I think that's super accepted and valuable to making a set run smoothly and to getting the best product out of it.
Yeah, and there's definitely like again, you bring up a good point about like you've got a ton of things running through your mind. Like there's definitely been moments like where I'm on a production and I'm definitely like just like a little bit overwhelmed, and I need somebody just to consider this idea beyond me. I think I stole this not tip, but like I stole this thing from Patrick Sullivan, where he
Oh
just
yeah,
looks at
wandering DP.
yeah, wandering DP, where he just looks at the eyepiece and everybody knows like just off, like don't bother me. I stole that
Mm-hmm.
because it gives me a moment to just like, all right, let me breathe, let me just look at the image for a second, let me see what it needs, let me go to my gaffer, let me go to my camera operator, let me figure this out, because in the moment right now I'm not focused, I'm not level headed. So in that same vein of thought, I'm wondering, what do you do when you get sort of overwhelmed with sort of all these people you have to talk to, especially as like a director? There's a lot of projects where um, especially in advertising, I imagine you answering to like all these different people on the agency side of things, and then all these different people on the production side of things. Do you manage that? How do you manage that? What is that thought process like?
Um, I think the easiest answer to that is pre-production,
Yeah.
or as my dad said, it's like the 7 P's: proper prior planning prevents poor performance.
Oh wow.
Six P's, yeah. It's all in pre-production when you're directing or producing. Getting all your ducks in a row before the actual day of the shoot is essential.
Yeah.
I've had, just like coming up in the film world, I started directing when I was pretty young. So, like, as a director, you're often also the producer and you're the one ordering lunch for people. You're the one booking the location. Like, you're wearing a bunch of different hats. And I've been burned so many times getting on set and just having too many people asking me questions, uh, because I hadn't thought of something beforehand. So nowadays, it's all in the pre-production and making sure you have certain people, whether they be assistant directors or line producers or um, just people in that their different departments, that the people below the line can ask those questions to.
Yeah.
um, and lining everything up with the brand or the client beforehand is also super essential, so you don't have any random questions pop up that affect how you're going to light something, affect where the cameras are going to go. All of that should be thought of way beforehand. And like I've had situations where we do a pre-light, client comes in, it's like, oh, that's not what we were thinking this is going to look like. And you have to do that quick scramble with your gaffer and your DP, your G&E unit. Like, all right, we got to change all this up. We got to either add a bunch more light because it's got to be brighter, it can't be as contrasty, or we got to change the tone of it, or even like camera stuff, we got to switch these angles up. Like, all of that should be prepared beforehand, whether it be with reference images, whether it be with like previously existing videos that the brand has done that they want to kind of mimic, or videos that they really like and want to use as inspiration. Like, that should all be talked of beforehand. Um, so that's as far as, like, I guess, like a visual perspective. Just handling different people and different requests on set. I think it's important to have a clear line of communication, from the client to you, the director.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had situations where I've got my ear tech on talking to the crew,
Yeah.
talking to the DP, being like, all right, punch in a little bit here, or give me a slow tilt here, or rack focus back here. And then I also have an AirPod in talking to the client. And I do not suggest that. It
Okay.
gets really, really confusing
Yeah.
really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Or even like having a computer off to the side that's a chat, and you got to be continuing to check that in. So nowadays, an AD is essential, and there's some amazing ADs in Chicago. Shout out my girl Saro. Um, she saved me on one of these last shoots where we were bouncing around to like 10 different locations in a single day. And
Wow.
her job is to answer questions from everybody else in the set. And her job, it almost like we were getting so overwhelmed. I would turn to her and I'm like, all right, where are we going next? Like, what shot is next? Like, I had made the shot list already, but with a million other things going on, I could turn to her and she could be like, all right, we're going to do this shot next. But we have this shot coming up after that. If we do that one first, then we can combine it with this shot too, and that saves us 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And like, amazing, let's do that.
Yeah, 10 minutes is huge.
So 10 minutes is huge. And because like inevitably you're going to lose 10 minutes somewhere else in the day
Yeah,
because, the sun goes behind some clouds or talent has to go to the bathroom or like random stuff like that. So it's awesome to have an AD that can help keep you in line and be kind of your schedule in your head while you can think about like purely what the shot's going to look like, what the talent's going to do,
yeah,
to stay focused on the creative.
yeah, and at least like for me, I sort of value my my camera team and my G&E team for that reason because
Hmm.
um, if I can get to a point where like they're sort of thinking for me and they sort of know like the ideas that I want to experiment with, or just the way that I like to rig the camera, so simple things like that. Like I think it really helps to sort of um, clarify my brain because I'm not spending a third of it just thinking about like, okay, how am I gonna what's this lighting setup going to look like? What's this sort of workflow? Like they can sort of think ahead for me and sort of think, and it
Hmm.
allows me to sort of have like what you're saying, like just clear communication with the director, and I value that so much just because. Again, I want to consider everything that they're saying, and they're probably also hearing what the agency's saying. And for me, it's important to be able to fully listen to what it is that they're saying and to make it easy any way that I can make it easier to sort of translate ideas and that just doesn't obstruct my brain. I think it helps 100%, and it's cool that you have.
Hmm.
It's clear that you have a pretty rigid workflow in terms of like the way you communicate with the agency people and the way that you communicate with production. I really admire the discipline that takes. That's
Hmm.
definitely a lot to rack your brain around sometimes, I figure.
Yeah, and something early on, coming out of, I started shooting videos when I was like 15.
Hmm.
And so when you're 15, you are naturally a one-man band.
Yeah.
You don't have crew that you're hiring to AC for you or to gaff for you. You're kind of doing everything yourself. So I came up as a one-man band sort of guy, and built a little business for myself in my hometown and was doing some commercials and, finally was able to hire a couple other people to do some other roles. But, I got to film school and I realized like, dang, I really don't know a lot of the intricate details about lighting
Yeah.
or about grip. Like, I don't know how to build a lot of these things because I usually just don't. Like my capabilities are limited to my skill set.
Yeah.
And so directly after college, I was still directing stuff, but I went to one of my buddies who I went to film school with, who I still shoot with all the time nowadays, and he was coming up as a gaffer and super talented gaffer. And I just asked him, I'm like, yo, let me come and grip for you sometime. Like, I don't care if I'm lowest man on the list. Like, let me just come and grip so I can learn how you're building all of this stuff
Yeah.
and like why you're building all of this stuff, why you're lighting it this way, and like given the tools because you have a limited budget, like what are we going to do with that budget, what kind of lights can we get to get this desired look. Like you always try and aim directly at the bullseye for whatever the treatment is,
Hmm.
but due to many different limitations you're not always able to hit it straight on. So it's like, how can we creatively problem solve? So for a couple of years I just gripped under him, which then transitioned to gaffing some of my own stuff, all the while still directing and shooting. But I think those couple years were super, super valuable for me because I was finally able to understand what it took to build out a set and why it's not so easy to just flip our world right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've all been on sets. Maybe you have a similar story where, you're shooting one way and this director who's so disconnected from like the actual making of anything, like
Yep.
they're just in like the creative
Yep.
idea world. They're like, all right, well, what if we just turn the angle and shoot everything that way now?
Yep.
And you know the grip is out back, like having just built something, like no, that's gonna
Yeah.
take another 2 hours, like we
Yeah.
can't do that. And so after seeing that a couple times, I vowed to never be that sort of director.
Yeah.
And I wanted to actually understand like what it took to build out this set and like how we can actually accomplish what we're looking for within a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
Because we've also all been on sets where like you see the shot list the night before on the call sheet and you're like, yo, this is a 10-hour day. There's no chance we're getting through 120 shots here.
Yeah.
Like, it's just completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that for anybody coming up in the film world, no matter what role you want to be on set, so you can not only know like the restrictions you have in a given shoot day, but also be able to communicate very intelligently with your other crew members. And as
Yeah.
a director, I never wanted to have to ask somebody in G&E or someone in camera to do something if I didn't have a basic idea of how to do that myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I pretty much I did a very similar thing. I didn't go to film school. I think I was in college for maybe about 2 years, and then sort of took a dip as work started to pick up. Even then, I didn't major in film and television. I majored in marketing actually.
Hmm.
So yeah, I did a very similar thing. I sort of was just like, in order, because I understood like my intent for my career. Like I always understood that like I wanted to be a DP. But I think sort of the main thing, obviously, is like if I'm going to be asking all these different people for all these different things, I gotta at least have a general sense of what they're asking. So I would always, I would pick up a few jobs here and there just involving like grip or an electrician, or I've second AC'd before. I first AC'd for many years before I was a DP, just for me to get a full scope of what it is I'm asking these guys to do. And I don't want to ask them for something ridiculous. And I don't want to look like, like what you were talking about earlier, that person that's just so disconnected from the set. Like I
Hmm.
despise being that person. Like I just want to have a level of understanding with everybody, and I just want to be able to just say like, "Hey, we're in this together. I 100% understand what it is your responsibilities are and what it is that you're mentally sort of considering when it comes to these sort of days." So you
Yeah.
went to film school. What was obviously I didn't go to film school. What was that experience like? And do you recommend it?
Um, I can't say I recommend it,
Hmm.
especially if film school is very expensive, and nowadays you learn the same things on a set, or oftentimes the same things on the internet that you can learn at film school.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to go to college, just more so for the college experience. Getting, moving out of my family's house. I moved straight from my hometown to Los Angeles to go to community college for a year in Santa Monica. And, that was an awesome experience just because, like, community college is community college. So it wasn't super intense schooling wise. So I was able to freelance and get on film sets as much as I could.
Yeah.
I transferred from there to DePaul University that had a really up and coming film program that I think is like top 20 in the nation now or something like that. And their primary focus was on digital cinema. And, like some other film schools really embrace the shooting on film, shooting on 16 millimeter,
Hmm.
um, which I almost wish I had a bit of that opportunity. But DePaul was like, no, no, no. We're going to put Aries in your hands right away. We're going to put Reds in your hands right away. We're going to teach you how to light. Like, we're kind of preparing you for the next generation of film.
Mm.
So I think that was valuable just in that it got our hands on gear and it allowed us to be on a sound stage and mess around with lighting, like how to rig something into a ceiling, how to key from outside and like work on a sound stage, outside of like a window on a sound stage, I mean. And I think that was valuable. More so than anything, though, it was just the people I met there,
Yeah.
all coming up at like around the same time and hungry to work in the film industry. I think that's so important in this world is developing your crew early on and recognizing other people that are kind of at your same sort of level, and growing with them. I mentioned that gaffer that I worked under for a couple of years. That's my friend Ted, and I met him at DePaul. And right out of film school, we started filming music videos together, filming mini documentaries together, and I still hire him to this day. like a bunch of other people from school I just met there, and we all kind of started and grew at the same level.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the coolest thing I think about this industry is one, being able to hire your friends and being able to like work with your friends on a day-to-day basis. Like how many offices do you go to where you're friends with everybody that is in your office?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I've worked in offices at ad agencies. It's not like that. You
Yeah.
got a couple friends, but it's not like with me when I'm directing or producing, I can hire everybody on set. And I usually hire you because I like you
Yeah.
and you're good at your job. So that's a really cool thing to be able to hire your friends, but then also to be able to grow with your friends. And to, like me and Ted, we were making these music videos where we would pay to make the music video.
Yeah.
Like the artist had a little bit of clout, like a couple thousand followers on Instagram or something, but they didn't have any budget. And we had some ideas and we were like, oh, shoot, all right, we'll pay to make this happen.
Yeah.
And, we pulled favors with people letting us borrow their gear, like pulled favors with locations. Like, I'll make you a video for your little gallery if you let us shoot there for a couple hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, going in the whole like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to be able to make what we want, to now working together and making great money together, working on global campaigns. I think it's like really awesome to look back 10 years ago and see like, oh man, this is where we started and now this is where we are. And like, we still have so much further to go.
Yeah.
So looping it back around to film school, I think that was a real benefit just to be able to meet your network of people. But you can do that without going to school and paying $100,000.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't suggest anybody take on a bunch of debt, like student loan debt, to be able to get into film school and think that that's going to open their doors to everything in the industry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the Chicago world that did not go to film school but are crushing it now. And I think that could almost be even more valuable, if you skip 4 years and just start working on sets right away. I think like you could get 4 years ahead of people who are still having to make their small student films to fulfill a class requirement.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely, you bring up a really interesting point about community. I think that was something I definitely would have enjoyed, I think, coming up. Like I think there was a handful of people that always sort of considered me that was around my age, and even what you're saying is like you're putting money up front in order to get these things done. I remember my first couple music videos were like that, where it was just sort of like, please just like trust me, let me do this video, I'll pay for the location, like whatever it is. And I remember having those conversations with the director, and I'm just like, all right, let's do it. I'm ready. Like I wanna get this done. I wanna build out my portfolio and just sort of get this exercise in, as I call it sometimes. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I
Got to get the
think
reps.
yeah, you gotta get the reps in. I think regardless of whatever it is. But yeah, I think I definitely would have enjoyed. I think that sort of community because it's like I think there's certain instances where there's definitely a large age gap on set. I've worked with
Mm-hmm.
gaffers who are maybe 30 years older than me, and it would have been
Mm-hmm.
nice to sort of hire someone that at least for that particular job, it would have been nice to hire somebody that was a bit closer to my age.
Hey,
But
take advantage of those gaffers, though, dude. Those guys have the best stories in the entire world.
yeah,
Like the people who came up shooting only film, only tungsten lights,
yeah.
like they got some crazy stories for how they would light a space or rig things. They're super valuable.
Yeah, this particular gaffer was he's very, like what we were talking about earlier. He's very rigid with his ideas. He's very hard headed and was like very. We're lighting tungsten. We're lighting very particular way, and I wasn't mad at the way that he was lighting it. I think for that particular project, it worked really well. But I wish like I was able to have a more open dialogue in terms of like the creative.
Hmm.
But I think yeah, it's I think it's cool that you were able to sort of find this sort of community in the film school, just because like yeah, I like the way I came up, it was just sort of like a couple of people who were willing to take a risk with me, and I was like, all right,
Hmm.
I gotta get these reps in. I gotta prove myself. I have nothing in my portfolio. I got nothing in my name. I don't have any student films. Nothing. Like I gotta
Hmm.
I gotta I gotta do everything I can, and I think as a result, I value um, gear as an investment for that reason, because the more I felt confident with the tools I was using, the more I felt like I can properly take on a project. And that's why for me, I'm such a big like uh, advocate for investing in gear, just because you feel 100% confident in the stuff that you're using, and be fully focused on the vision. I think that's sort of my main um, advantages. Like I've been able to have some exercise, and I've been able to kind of get the reps in, master, not master. I don't think I'll ever be a master, but I think I have a level of refinement to what I'm doing, and I understand like the tools that I'm using, and things like that. So on that same vein of thought, actually, what are your thoughts on, because you've made the investment to film school, and it's turned out to be pretty fruitful. What do you think that gear is a good investment? Do you think it's a bad investment? What's sort of your perspective on that? I know we were talking gear just before the show started, but I want to hear more of your thoughts on gear ownership, and sort of your relationship with the camera.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think one answer is better than the other. I think it's all very personable to you and what your workload is like and what type of projects you're getting. I started investing in gear, honestly, like most of the gear I bought right after COVID started,
Yeah.
like late 2020, early 2021, when no work was coming through, which was probably not a super smart decision, but it was by necessity because as some projects started to trickle in at the end of 2020, a lot of the rental houses were not open, or it was harder for me to borrow gear from my friends. Typically, like 10-person crews were getting stripped down to like two people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't rely on my gaffer to bring his truck anymore, or the AC to have a bunch of camera package. So I started just buying a camera, buying aperture lights. Aperture changed the game for everything
Yeah.
with LEDs, making them not only like super accessible to anybody, but also super quality, and like well built, good light quality, good output, and like very attainable for anybody to own. And so I started buying gear just to make my life a bit easier on set. I can bring everything. I got the camera package, I got the lenses, I eventually bought a Teradek so I could have wireless.
Nice.
Um, and I got a bit of an LED package that we can light everything with. So it was a huge benefit for me to own gear because then I could be considered an owner operator. And my package is not going to be suited for every job. There's still definitely jobs where we need to get a full grip truck, or we need a nicer camera than what I own. I often rent lenses per job, but for those like middle tier projects, my gear will do just fine, and I can get good rates on that gear. So I will say, like for me, it has been a huge advantage and very profitable just to be able to charge the client rates for my labor and rates for all my gear.
Yeah.
And it's mutually beneficial for the client too, because if they were renting all the gear a la carte from different rental houses, then what I'm providing would cost them double, triple, 5 times as much as I'm actually charging them.
Mm-hmm.
But because I own it all, I can bundle it into an owner operator rate, and which will be much better than just a labor rate. But we'll save them money on having to rent and save them hassle on having to rent from all these different rental houses. So
Yeah.
it's worked out really well for me. It's funny, like I've shot with a few production companies out of New York. We've done some stuff for Vice and for Vox and like Uproxx. They come from New York to Chicago. Whenever they book me, they're like, all right, we've got you, and then we're gonna reach out to these different people for the crew, and then we're gonna go to this rental house for all the camera stuff, and then this rental house for all the G&E stuff. And I'm like, well, I can just call my guys that I use, typically as a camera operator or as a gaffer, AC. Like, let me just give them a quick text. Oh, shoot, they responded to me already. Yep, they're free. Okay, let's book them. I actually have this whole camera package, and then I have this whole G&E package, and then my gaffer, he can bring a couple of these extra stands, extra lights. Like between my kit and his kit, like we'll be good.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, wait, what? Like we don't have to have somebody deliver gear to us. And it kind of clicked. Like New York, it's very hard to store a bunch of gear in your
Yeah,
apartment. You
definitely.
know, you don't have as much space, and often the places are walk-ups, so you can't keep as much gear. Where here, you know, I've lived in a walk-up with all my gear, and that was terrible.
Yeah,
But thankfully, my business kind of keep our own gear packages and be pretty lean and mean, and be able to go to any job just utilizing our stuff. That saves us time having to drive down to rental houses, and you know, just makes our life easier, and makes us able to shoot like at any time too.
yeah,
You know, unfortunately, there still are jobs that pop up super last minute. As much as I preach on loving pre-production, there still are jobs that, and usually they're the more simple jobs that pop up last minute, and it's like, hey, we just need somebody to shoot tomorrow. You know, we need like B-roll coverage, we need an interview, we need somebody to be available tomorrow. And if I had to like go to somebody else's, like go to a rental house or go to somebody else's house to pick up a bunch of gear, that'd be really annoying. But because I keep everything with me, like it's very easy to be ready to go at any time.
yeah. I sort of feel the same way. I think it's just being able to sort of have a camera package that you can just sort of pick up and just kind of do some sort of bundle yourself, and I think that's a really nice advantage, especially like because you're very confident in your gear, and especially like with your gaffer, for example, you want to consider their business and like sort of
Mm-hmm.
the lighting package that they have. You might as well. There's incentive as well, just for you to earn them money directly, and also for
Mm-hmm.
since their lighting package like 110%, like well, why would we rent anything else? You automatically off the bat know it, like I'm not going to need to rent anything externally. But yeah, interesting you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned like space in New York. I did a production earlier this year in Brooklyn, and yeah, it was a really tough situation just to get gear around because there wasn't, there's nowhere you can load in, there's nowhere you can sort of drop off
Mm-hmm.
gear. So it was a fairly limited situation. Luckily, though, at least in terms of the body of the camera, the director owned a mini. So
Nice.
we were just using his mini package, but we still
Mm-hmm.
needed to get lenses from another run a house, which is really interesting to sort of
Mm-hmm.
like the way that we had to sort of manage all these different people was hilarious. Just because like we had people going like through Uber, just to, like
Yeah,
get their gear in there,
the
and
Uber grip truck.
yeah,
We
the
call
Uber
them that.
Grift Trub. Yeah, we had to really keep our package like pretty light and pretty like intentional. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I wouldn't have had that issue if I had my camera package, or like
Mm-hmm.
just certain G&E strings that I can pull. Obviously, I have a lot more resources in LA. I think in New York they're much more limited, but
Yeah.
so you kind of have to do those sort of oddball like trying to get gear from certain places and things like that. So it's really interesting that you mention it. Especially, is it like that in Chicago where space is? I've never been to Chicago. I've never worked in Chicago. Is the space like fairly limited? Is it like compared to New York versus LA? Like what would you say it's closer to?
Chicago's so big that it's kind of a mixture of both. With, I mean, obviously it's a big city,
Yeah,
but you think about like downtown Chicago, like the Loop and like River North and the areas that are like very close to the lake and the river. That feels like New York. That feels like all of Manhattan, you know, where everywhere you go, you have these huge skyscrapers above you. But Chicago is super neighborhood oriented. There's like 80 neighborhoods in Chicago. And so not all of them feel like it's New York, you
yeah,
know, with all the huge buildings, and um, like some of them feel, you know, you have a little bit more space, you have more green space, the houses are a little bit more spread out. You know, nowhere in the city do you have like huge yards that, you know, you're able to put a whole soccer field or something, but you have more space, you can find street parking. And you know, it's nice that you can kind of escape that and be able to get out, and like where I live now, you know, I have enough square footage that I can have a bedroom solely dedicated to my office and to my gear storage.
nice.
Um, and you know, based on like what neighborhood you live in, things are more or less expensive. But I would say like getting gear around. I know a lot of people that are owner operators, or you know, if they work in G&E, they have a package for themselves that they can drive around. Um, So I would say it's definitely leaning a bit more towards Los Angeles in that where you can actually store your gear
Hmm.
and not have to haul it up 10 flights of stairs.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
yeah. But you mentioned something that I should have touched on as well as far as gear ownership that I think is super valuable. And it's owning gear so that you can do those passion projects.
Yeah,
And that was, initially also one of the big motivators to getting gear myself because like we would be shooting these music videos for, like I said, no money or like we have to pay to make them happen. And it's like, dang, I'm paying to rent something that I eventually could just own, and then I could use it whenever I want. And
yeah,
like on music videos, like you don't always get full gear rates for everything, but that's okay if you own it yourself versus you having to take that money and pay somebody else to rent that piece of gear.
yeah,
And thankfully, like we've got a lot of homies in Chicago who will understand if it's a music video or short film or low budget project. They'll throw you a bone and like I'll let you rent this for free if you let me rent that for free sometime. So there's some sort of trades like that that go on. But it was definitely a big motivator early on to own at least a small enough package where I could just get up and shoot anything I wanted at any time.
yeah. And you don't have
And
to deal with like the logistics of anything.
I mean, that's like there is still a barrier to entry in the film world, not nearly as much as it was back in the olden days.
Yeah,
But like, I mean, gear is you to be able to shoot something like you have to have a camera. You should have some lights. You should have a lens that is halfway decent. And so just like having that sort of gear ready to go for any job, then or for at least like a small tier job, and then for bigger jobs you can like bring in nicer lenses, nicer G&E. Like hopefully those jobs have some sort of budget, but it still opens up the world to be a filmmaker. You don't want ever the gear to limit your creative possibilities. And so,
yeah.
just having something to work with and something to actually shoot with, I think was super valuable.
Yeah, and I still generally feel the same way. Like it's nice, like what I was talking about earlier, like just getting a rep in. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's just like whether there's even like been certain instances where like, especially now because the work is sort of at a lull.
Mm-hmm.
I've just sort of been taking my camera outside and just like getting a couple frames up for the sake of just getting a few reps in. Not necessarily that work is going on, but just so I can constantly be in the practice of shooting something, just in the practice of just exercising that eye. But yeah, since we were
Yeah.
talking about logistics earlier and sort of dealing with okay, we don't have to get all this stuff a la carte. We don't have to sort of coordinate with all these different rental houses like to get gear. How do you manage sort of the different pockets of work that you cover? Because I can imagine, like on set we have these super long days.
Mm-hmm.
Like we and you're probably going back and forth between these different schools of thought, whether it's like a director workflow versus an editorial workflow versus a DP workflow. How do you like check in on yourself? I ask this to everybody just because I sort of am wondering more so for myself as well. Like, how do you sort of manage all that different work, at least for your mental health, especially with long days and for your
Mm-hmm.
brain to just be still? How do you give yourself that time, and what does that look like, just sort of as like a from a self-care sort of point of view?
Are you saying like when you're not working, how to recover from that so you can be the best when you are working, or like when you're on set, kind of staying in the moment and staying focused and prioritizing whatever given role you
More
are
of
on that day?
more of the former.
The former?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, mental health is a huge part of this industry, especially because, it is such a grind at times and we're not compensated for every hour we put in.
yeah,
Like a lot of jobs like you are paid for the amount of time you're working.
yeah,
With our world, like our hourly rate would be drastically low if we got paid for every single hour we're working or thinking about work. Like I always relate it to like somebody who's an accountant, where it's like they check in, they do their job, they check out, and maybe during tax season they're still thinking about stuff when they're going to bed, but for the most part, like they can live a life outside of their job.
yeah,
I think our job is so all encompassing. I think that's a huge pro and also a big con of our job, where like it becomes part of our identity in a way. And I guess for me, COVID was a big wake up call for that. Because, I had been doing it for like 10 years already once COVID hit. And when all of the jobs dry up and no one's shooting and no one has budgets to push anything anymore, for the first time, I was like stuck with weeks where I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like, I got to kind of reconnect with myself for a bit. And I mean, it sucked and it was a huge identity crisis and definitely a lot of like existential thought about who I was as a person, what my role here on this planet even was, what I want my future to look like. But coming out of that, I think it has been super valuable to recognize that it is a job and you do have to give yourself time outside of the job to be able to, be a person. I think as a director, especially, a lot of your work comes from your ideas, and you're paid for your ideas in a
Yeah.
lot of way. And you can't be coming up with good ideas if you're constantly working yourself to the bone, never getting sleep, and never having any time to just kind of like think. Some of these like big tech entrepreneurs, they budget in their time like 30% of their week is just blue sky thinking,
Hmm.
where they're just kind of like pondering things or like going for walks and kind of like envisioning new ideas for things, just like being curious about the world. And I think that's like very important for anybody in the art space to prioritize time just to be able to come up with ideas that are fresh and ideas that they haven't thought of before. I think it's good to be holistically healthy, whether you're physically healthy, you're getting exercise, you're mentally healthy, you're reading good things, you're meditating, socially healthy, having good relationships with your friends and family around you.
Yeah.
You want to water all the plants in your garden. And I think for us in the film world, like it's so easy just to water that plant that is our work or our art, because those are kind of combined. And you're
Yeah.
going to grow that plant really, really, really tall. But in the meantime, all your other plants are drying up and getting infected.
Yeah.
And, that hurts other parts of your life. And eventually, when those plants get infected, that's going to start to infect the work plant as well.
Yeah.
So you got to water all the plants in your garden, and I think it takes you a long time to learn that because of hustle culture and because of like I worked so hard last night. Like it's almost a badge of honor that we wear in the film industry. Like, dude, I haven't slept in 3 weeks
Yeah.
because I've been on this film. And I know I used to rock that when I was editing all the time and like pulling these overnights. It's like, dude, I went to bed at 4 a.m. last night. And it's only cool for so long before it starts to really weigh you down. And you start to see it on set with people who are just working to the bone. And I think it's awesome that we're getting work and people are hiring us, but you got to recognize that you got to take some time for yourself too, or else you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
And burnout is very, very, very real. I think you talked in book club, Alex. Like you had a period where you were feeling pretty burnt out and needed to like reevaluate things. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a pretty hard and fast burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Everything sort of hit me all at once, and I just became overwhelmed and dissatisfied with like a lot of the work I was doing, to be honest with you. And I feel like only recently have I started to be able to confidently come out of that. I think there was still kind of a little bit that was like kind of like, okay, like I'm still dealing with this a little bit. But I think recently have I came out of that. But it was pretty difficult because I feel like it felt like I was trying to fit. The only way I can really describe that feeling was just basically it felt like I was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, where like this sort of thing would just come to me naturally. Why isn't it coming naturally? Why am I getting frustrated? Why am I not liking what I'm doing? I'm normally really passionate about this. And it wasn't until then I had like a massive, I don't know if I touched on this in book club, but I had like a massive ego death, where it was just sort of like I
Mm-hmm.
questioned the sort of work I was doing, and this sort of DP I want to be, and it was a really difficult moment where I sort of questioned like how much do I really value this, and that's sort of the main reason why I sort of asked like what people do for their mental health, just because I think um, I'm still sort of getting into learning what that sort of we'll call it a boundary. Like I'm still learning what that boundary looks like. but I think I have something down. you know, I
Hmm.
what I've sort of done is I just sort of I've sort of realized like this is a marathon. You know, you want to be in it.
Absolutely.
You want to be in it for the long haul, and you want to just.
Hmm.
It's important to just like take a stretch every so often, like especially like in between projects. Like I try to just take a beat and breathe because I definitely during that sort of burnout period, there were definitely moments where like I was obsessing over the wrong thing. To be honest, like there were definitely, for example, like we were working on a production. It was a short film. It was only for about like 5 days, and the entire pre-production, I was so fixated on this stupid cable that I needed for my tear deck, and it blocked me from sort of having certain creative conversations with the director that were so important. Why was I
Hmm.
fixated on this cable? Like I could have just gone to Creative Solutions in Burbank and just like gotten the replacement that I needed. Like what was the problem there? You know, but
Hmm.
but it was that was sort of another realization that I had where it was like I need to take a step and just like chill the fuck out. Cuz like I'm
Hmm.
not focused on the right things. I'm not passionate about the work, and it reflects. It shows. It like the quality of the work has changed for sure,
Yep.
and that's
You got to
purely
view things from 10,000 feet at times.
yeah. Just to, and sometimes it's like you need to live your life in order to get perspective on things. Sometimes in the moment it doesn't make sense, but once you live your life a little bit, it's like okay, that idea that I had before, where you initially planted that seed, now that idea makes more sense because I'm
Hmm.
I'm level headed, and I value that so much just because now I value that in hindsight, right?
Hmm.
because because now I can go to every project with like a complete level head, and I ask
Hmm.
everybody this sort of question about mental health just because I think it's important that we even consider that, I mean, that we even have that conversation just because, especially you
Hmm.
working with like in sort of three different pockets, I think I would make the argument that it's very important to allow yourself this sort of grace and this sort of opportunity just to take a step back and just say, you know what, let me chill the fuck out. Let me not overthink this
Hmm.
idea. Let me not get it too into it because I know I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. Like that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
definitely. And I think what you said about it being a marathon is super important because like
Yeah.
I think we get so focused at times where it is a sprint and we got to go 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 and we got to just like go from one project to the next project and you get these ideas and you're like, "Oh man, that would be such a cool idea for a video or a story, like I got to make that happen."
Yeah.
And Casey Neistat had one of these videos where, like, shout out Casey Neistat, he's OG
I
and just
love
like so
Casey.
much valuable information, and execution is everything.
Yeah.
It's like 1% versus 99%. Like the ideas are so easy versus the execution. And I think once you get like into the film world, you realize how hard it is to actually make something and make it good. And I would argue even the better you get, the harder the jobs become because you want to push yourself every job. Like, yeah, you could phone it in and make something super simple, but that might not live up to your expectations for yourself or your level of quality of work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm starting to kind of get these. I'm starting to accept the fact that I got this notebook of dozens of ideas of videos that I want to make eventually, but when they happen, they happen.
Yeah.
And like there some of these ideas me and my friends have been talking about for years and finally are like, all right, let's actually make it.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally okay. And I think like what you said about just checking out a bit, one thing I really value and I think really helps clear my head is traveling, especially like
Mm.
traveling internationally and just getting out of the city and even the country for a little bit and just getting a completely fresh perspective on what other parts of the world are like.
Yeah.
Nothing is better for me than like seeing. I went to Southeast Asia recently,
Nice.
to Thailand and to Vietnam, and it's a different world over there, man. Like every day you step outside and things are just like it's an adventure. You don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
There's motorcycles whirling by, there's goats in the street, animals running everywhere, just people everywhere. And nothing makes you feel smaller and more humbled than being in a place like in a foreign land that you're not top dog. And I think that's an incredible form of ego death where you can just be a spectator in someone else's world for a little bit.
Yeah.
And um, I mean, it also helped that it was like a 16-hour time difference or something crazy like that. So like I couldn't really be contacted by people
Yeah.
all day, every day.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, it's something that helps you clear your head a bit, and you don't have to travel to another country to get that. You know, just get out into nature for a little bit, get some sun shining on you. I mean, shout out Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist. That he has an incredible podcast that is all about like how your brain, how parts of your body affect your brain and like your mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
one of his biggest suggestions is every day spending an hour outside in daylight as early in the day as possible from when you wake up,
Mm.
you know, and just like getting some vitamin D and getting some daylight is super important, and like boosts your mood. And you know, we get in these zones where it's like I've been on a soundstage for 3 weeks straight, or
Yeah.
I've been in an edit cave for 3 weeks straight. I haven't seen the sun. You're like that character in the movie The Benchwarmers. You remember that? That
Yeah.
guy is just like inside all day, like
Yeah.
eating sunscreen.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you become that guy, and it's just important to disconnect, even if it's for 30 minutes. Just go for a walk, um, or step away from your screen for a little bit, and you're going to come back with a whole new perspective.
Yeah, I definitely really force that because you mentioned like earlier about like you wanting to push yourself. Like I feel like every production, the more I'm able to, it's like Pandora's box. Like the moment I learn about a certain lighting fixture or I learn about a certain camera technique, I'm immediately, wanting to dive in, and then it opens up this whole can of worms
Hmm.
that, it feels endless at times. But I think forcing that sort of step back and really focusing on like what it is the intention behind this sort of creative decision is, and also like just being able to stay level headed, I think is really important. So yeah, that's sort of my main
Hmm.
reason for asking that, just because like I always like to just check in with every sort of creative person and understand like, hey, are you doing okay? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? That's like first and foremost.
Yeah.
It fuels everything. Like we shouldn't take that for granted, and we should always be actively considering ourselves and where our heads at.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think checking in with your artist friends in particular,
Yeah.
I think is super important. Um, I mean, we have our book club,
Yeah.
like kind of that's how I met you,
Yeah.
is through this book club that our friend Ryan started, and that was super valuable. And just getting a bunch of, I mean, it started with what, like 20 people in it, and then
Yeah.
eventually got dwindled down to like the seven of us that are
Yeah.
in it. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And we're all in the art space in some way, whether it be like musicians, recording artists, or filmmakers.
Yeah.
And it basically just became a support group. I mean, what it is now essentially is just like a support group for
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just therapy
the
session.
It's this therapy session, but I think that was so cool to see like other people. And I had never known you before.
Yeah.
You live in Los Angeles, I'm in Chicago. Ryan was literally the only person I knew in that group,
Yeah.
but we've all become homies with each other.
Yeah.
And it's been really valuable to see how other artists are going through their world and like mentally where they're at, or like what success is feeling like for them, or what their goals are they're working towards. I think it's very important to check in with your artist friends, because I mean we're all feeling a certain type of way all the time, and at least in the film world, like I hire my friends all the time, but at a certain point I'm like, dang, I haven't hung out with you outside of a set for like a year.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I started doing with some of my film guys. We'll get dinner at this Costa Rican joint in Chicago, like every month or so, every other month, and it's been an awesome time just to like catch up. Like, yo, how's your life going?
Yeah.
Like, how's your girlfriend? Oh, you're engaged? Awesome. Like what else do you have going on? Like, oh, you've been riding your bike a lot, or you got this like side project you're working on. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Because on set you're just like go 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 go, and you're it's just a lot of copy that, and all right, be right there,
Yeah.
or like it's not as much like. getting shoulder to shoulder and like checking in with how we actually are doing as human beings,
Yeah. And I try
which
to
I
be
think is so
more,
important.
yeah, I try to be more adamant about checking in with everybody, at least, especially like within my camera team. I try to make sure everybody's of sound mind, and if they need the space to talk to somebody or if they need the space just to like chill the out, like I'll give it to them. Like it's no problem. And even like what you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier, like Streety and I, we're working together currently, and there isn't like a moment really where it's like off work discussion. Like it's sort of
Mm-hmm.
always like we're always on. We just did a tech scout recently for a project coming up, and it's just sort of a work conversation. Every so often there's the chance to interject and sort of say like, hey, what's good? How you doing? Doing that sort of check in and seeing what they got going on. I'm trying to be more adamant about that, especially speaking of what we got going on. What can we look forward to from you kind of coming soon? What do you have on the horizon? What kind
Let
of
me think.
creative goals, if you want to answer it that way, too?
Yeah, some creative goals. Got a couple documentaries in the mix that I'm wrapping up post. I just wrapped up post on a couple of the bigger jobs this year, and I'm about to start pre-production on a couple of bigger jobs towards the end of the year. So I'm in this. It's actually this really nice sort of like couple week period where I'm starting to put down some ideas for jobs that I want to do either towards the end of this year or early next year. So I got a couple documentaries that I want to get going
Nice.
and hopefully grow into something bigger. If we can get some funding for it, might turn into a feature doc.
Yeah.
Some music videos want to get going, and some couple brand spots that I've been in contact with. A couple companies that I've used their products for a while, and you know they didn't reach out to me. I reached out to them, and trying to figure out if I can make something for them, and if they'd even like find any value in it. Um, so yeah, kind of just like putting ideas to paper, and hopefully going to be starting to shoot some stuff that I'm really passionate about in the next coming months.
All right. Today's episode is now over. You can go home. It's okay. There's no secret like Marvel post credit scene, nothing like that. You can end the episode here. It's totally fine. But before you do, please check out Parker's work. His work is incredibly solid and is always work that actively inspires me when I see it, regardless of whatever hand he had in production. It's always something I look forward to every time it comes up on my social media or just sort of whenever I hear him talking about it. It's always something that's inspiring for sure. I've only gotten to know him over the last year and a half or so via a book club that we're both in. That went from kind of a bit of a self help uh, book club where we read a bunch of self help books to now it's just sort of like an hour long therapy session for kind of everybody in there. So, but I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.